The mahogany conference table gleamed under the law office's fluorescent lights when my sister Victoria choked on her sparkling water. The real estate appraiser had just finished reading the final assessment, and the number hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar: $4.2 million. Victoria's designer handbag slipped from her manicured fingers and hit the carpet with a muffled thud. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air in a bowl that had suddenly become too small. The same mouth that had spent 3 years calling my house an embarrassment, a neighborhood eyesore, a complete waste of inherited family money. Now she was staring at me across polished wood, and I could see the exact moment her world tilted sideways. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 7 months earlier, I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen washing mason jars when Victoria walked through the back door without knocking. The screen door slammed behind her with that particular sound that means someone's already irritated before they've said a word. She surveyed the peeling linoleum and the vintage appliances with the expression of someone who'd discovered something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. My name is Elena Castillo, and at 28, I'd been living in our grandmother's house for exactly 2 years. Not because I couldn't afford my own place, but because someone needed to care for Abuela during her final months, and Victoria had been too busy climbing the corporate ladder at her marketing firm to spare more than holiday visits. When Abuela passed, she left the house to both of us, but Victoria made it clear from day one that she considered it my problem to solve. The house sat on Maple Avenue, in the older section of Riverside, a neighborhood where century-old oaks created canopies over sidewalks that had seen better decades. The homes were built in the 1920s, when craftsmanship meant something, and families stayed put for generations. Ours was a modest 2-story craftsman, with a wraparound porch, dormer windows, and what real estate agents politely called character. What they didn't mention was the original hardwood floors, hidden under decades of carpet, the solid oak beams supporting 12-foot ceilings, or the fact that the foundation was built to last another 100 years. Victoria saw none of this potential. She saw outdated fixtures, wallpaper from the 80s, and a kitchen that hadn't been renovated since Reagan was president. More importantly, she saw an anchor dragging down her perfectly curated life. That particular afternoon, she'd come bearing coffee from the expensive place downtown and wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She set her cup on the counter without asking for a coaster and launched into her familiar refrain. "Elena, we need to talk about this situation," she said, gesturing around the kitchen like it was a crime scene. "It's been 2 years since Abuela died. 2 years of you living here like some kind of caretaker, and for what? This place is falling apart. The neighborhood is going downhill. Mrs. Henderson's yard looks like a jungle, and don't get me started on the Thompsons' collection of broken lawnmowers." I continued washing jars, letting her words bounce off me like rain on a well-built roof. These conversations followed the same script every few months. Victoria would arrive with solutions that involved selling the house quickly and cheaply, splitting whatever modest profit remained, and moving on with our lives. She spoke about Abuela's house the way other people discussed disposing of damaged goods. "The Morales family next door is talking about selling," she continued, opening her phone to show me real estate listings. "Their place went on the market last week for $180,000. That's after they put in new carpet and painted everything beige. If we're lucky, we might get $200 for this place, but only if we're willing to invest serious money in renovations that may not even pay off." She paused for emphasis, expecting me to jump at the chance to escape what she clearly viewed as a financial burden. When I didn't respond immediately, she shifted tactics. "Think about it practically, Elena. You're young, you're smart, you have that accounting degree. Why are you wasting your time in this museum when you could be building a real life somewhere that matters? Move to the city, get a job with an actual future, stop hiding in the past." I dried my hands on a dish towel that Abuela had embroidered with tiny yellow flowers, and turned to face my sister. Victoria was beautiful in the way that money and careful maintenance can make someone beautiful. Her hair was styled in loose waves that looked effortless, but required a standing appointment every 6 weeks. Her nails were perfect ovals painted in a shade called something like sophisticated nude. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that the world would arrange itself according to her preferences. We shared the same dark eyes and olive complexion that came from our grandmother's Spanish heritage, but Victoria had learned to soften those features with expensive makeup and strategic highlighting. I wore my hair in a simple ponytail and owned exactly 3 tubes of lipstick, all of which were currently lost somewhere in the depths of my purse. "I'm not hiding," I said quietly. "I'm living." Victoria sat with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a stubborn child. "Elena, look around. Really look. The wallpaper in the dining room is literally peeling off the walls. The bathroom upstairs still has that avocado green tile from the 70s. The front porch steps are starting to sag. This isn't living, it's camping in a historical monument that nobody wants to visit." She pulled out a tablet and began swiping through photos. "Look at what I found in Harbor Hills. 2-bedroom condo, updated everything, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. The complex has a gym and a pool. You could have a normal life, Elena. You could date someone who doesn't have to drive through a neighborhood that looks like it stopped evolving in 1995. I knew Victoria meant well, in her own limited way. She genuinely believed that happiness could be measured in square footage of modern amenities and proximity to upscale shopping centers. Her own condo was a showplace of neutral colors and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Everything matched, nothing was out of place, and every surface gleamed with the kind of perfection that required constant vigilance. "Have you thought about what Abuela would want?" I asked. Victoria's expression tightened. "Abuela's gone, Elena. She can't want anything anymore. And if we're being honest, she was from a different generation. She never understood money, or investment, or building wealth. She thought keeping house in the same neighborhood for 60 years was some kind of accomplishment." The casual dismissal of our grandmother's life hit me like a slap. Abuela had raised us after our parents died in a car accident when I was 12 and Victoria was 15. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed, had never missed a school play or parent conference, and had filled the house with the kind of love that still echoed in its corners. But Victoria remembered different things. "She used to say this house would always be our anchor," I said. "Something solid to hold on to when everything else shifted. Anchors are for boats, Elena, and boats are supposed to move." Victoria finished her coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink, a small concession to politeness that she'd probably learned in some corporate etiquette seminar. She checked her phone and made a small noise of irritation at whatever notification had appeared. "I have to get back to the office," she said, sliding the device into her purse. "But think about what I said. Really think about it. We could both have a fresh start if you'd just stop being so sentimental about 4 walls and a roof." After she left, the house settled into its familiar afternoon quiet. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the kitchen window, and I could hear the old radiator ticking as it adjusted to the changing temperature. These sounds had become the soundtrack of my days, as reliable as my own heartbeat. I walked through the rooms that Victoria found so disappointing, running my fingers along surfaces that held decades of family history. The dining room wallpaper that was peeling in places had tiny roses that Abuela had chosen when she was a young bride. The avocado bathroom tiles were original to the house, and had been the height of fashion when they were installed. The hardwood floors bore scuff marks from 3 generations of children learning to walk and run and dance. What Victoria saw as decay, I saw as character. What she interpreted as stagnation, I understood as continuity. This house wasn't just a place to live, it was a repository of everything our family had been and everything we might become. But I wasn't naive about the challenges. The house did need work, and work required money I didn't have in abundance. My job at a small accounting firm paid enough to cover utilities, groceries, and basic maintenance, but major renovations were beyond my current budget. I'd been slowly updating things as I could afford them, learning to do much of the work myself through internet tutorials and helpful advice from neighbors who'd been facing similar challenges for years. Mrs. Henderson next door, despite Victoria's criticisms of her gardening style, had taught me how to repair the loose floorboard in the upstairs hallway. Tom Peterson from across the street had shown me how to patch the small leak in the basement. These were people who understood that maintaining an old house was a community effort, that neighbors helped neighbors because that's how neighborhoods survived. Victoria didn't understand this kind of community because she'd chosen to live in a place where maintenance was someone else's responsibility, and neighbors were optional acquaintances. Her world was efficient and predictable, but it was also isolated in ways that I didn't think she fully recognized. That evening, I called my friend Marcus, who worked as a contractor and had been helping me develop a long-term renovation plan for the house. We'd been friends since high school, and he'd inherited his father's construction business, along with an encyclopedic knowledge of how old houses were built and why they lasted. "Let me guess," he said, when I described Victoria's latest visit. "She thinks you should sell and move to one of those cookie-cutter complexes where everything's beige and nothing has a story." Marcus had met Victoria exactly once, at Abuela's funeral, but he'd formed an immediate and accurate assessment of her character. He'd watched her spend the entire reception checking her phone and making notes about property values, while other people shared memories of our grandmother's kindness. "She's not wrong about the house needing work," I said. "The question is whether it's worth the investment." "Elena, I've been inside this house a dozen times in the past year. The bones are solid, the foundation is better than most new construction. The electrical was updated in the 90s, and the plumbing is mostly good except for that one pipe in the kitchen. You've got original hardwood throughout, plaster walls that are built to last, and architectural details that would cost a fortune to replicate today." He paused, and I could hear him moving around his own workshop, probably organizing tools while we talked. "But here's the thing," he continued. "It's not just about the house, it's about the neighborhood. I've been watching this area for the past few years, and things are starting to change. Young families are moving in, people who appreciate the character and the mature trees, and the sense of community. Property values are going to start climbing, and when they do, your sister's going to wish she'd listened to you instead of trying to convince you to bail out." Marcus had been saying this for months, but the evidence was still mostly anecdotal. A few houses had sold for more than expected.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Some new families had moved in and immediately begun updating their properties. The coffee shop on Main Street had expanded and added outdoor seating. These were small signs, but Marcus insisted they pointed toward bigger changes coming. "How long do you think it would take?" I asked. "For property values to really jump, maybe 2 or 3 years, depending on how fast the gentrification wave moves this direction. For your house specifically to reach its potential, depends on how much work you want to put in and how smart you are about which updates to prioritize." We spent the next hour talking about projects that would give me the biggest return on investment. Refinishing the hardwood floors would transform the entire feel of the house. Updating the kitchen could be done gradually, keeping the original cabinets, but replacing hardware and appliances. The bathroom upstairs needed attention, but even that could be done strategically, keeping vintage elements that added character while improving functionality. None of it would happen overnight, and all of it would require more money than I currently had available. But Marcus was willing to work with me on a payment plan, doing projects in phases as I could afford them. He understood that this wasn't just about increasing property value, it was about creating a home that honored the past while embracing the future. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the front porch swing that Abuela had installed the year before she died. The evening air carried the scent of honeysuckle from Mrs. Henderson's supposedly overgrown garden, and I could hear children playing in the park 2 blocks away. This was the life Victoria wanted me to abandon, these simple pleasures that couldn't be quantified on a real estate listing. My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Found another condo listing. 3 bedrooms, move-in ready, great schools nearby for when you start a family. Think about your future, not your past." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched the fireflies begin their nightly dance among the oak trees and thought about the difference between a future built on convenience and one built on purpose. Victoria was right that I needed to think about my future, but she was wrong about what that future should look like. The next morning, I called the city planning office and asked about development plans for our neighborhood. The woman who answered was helpful and knowledgeable, explaining that the area had been designated for historical preservation, which meant stricter guidelines for new construction, but also tax incentives for property owners who maintained original architectural features. She also mentioned that a new light rail line was being planned, with a stop that would be within walking distance of Maple Avenue. The project was still in early stages, but completion was projected for within 5 years. Transportation access was one of the key factors that drove property appreciation in residential neighborhoods. I spent the afternoon at the library, researching real estate trends and neighborhood development patterns. What I found confirmed much of what Marcus had been telling me. Areas with mature trees, walkable streets, and architectural character were increasingly valued by homebuyers who were tired of generic suburban developments. The key was timing and the willingness to invest in improvements that highlighted a property's unique qualities, rather than trying to make it look like everything else. Over the following weeks, I began documenting everything about the house that had historical or architectural significance. The original crown molding in the living room. The built-in bookcases in the den that were crafted from solid oak. The stained glass window on the stairway landing that caught morning light and threw rainbows across the wall. These weren't flaws to be hidden or updated, they were assets to be showcased. I also started paying attention to changes happening throughout the neighborhood. The house across the street had been purchased by a couple in their 30s, who immediately began restoring the original front porch. 2 blocks away, someone had opened a small art gallery in what used to be a corner grocery store. The elementary school had received a grant to update its playground and after-school programs. These weren't dramatic changes, but they represented momentum in a positive direction. The neighborhood was evolving, not declining, and people who understood its potential were beginning to invest in its future. Victoria visited again in early October, this time bringing printed real estate listings and what appeared to be a formal presentation. She'd clearly spent time preparing her arguments, and she approached the conversation with the kind of systematic efficiency that had made her successful in her marketing career. "Elena, I've been doing research," she announced, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "I've looked at comparable sales in this area for the past 3 years, and the numbers don't lie. Property values here are stagnant. Meanwhile, neighborhoods just 10 minutes away are seeing significant appreciation." She pulled out a map, marked with colored pins representing different price ranges and sale dates. "Look at Harbor Hills. Average appreciation of 12% per year for the past 5 years. Look at Westbrook Commons. 8% annually, and they're still building new phases." Her presentation was thorough and professional, the kind of analysis that would impress clients in a conference room. She'd identified target demographics, calculated cost per square foot comparisons, and even created a timeline showing optimal market conditions for selling. "If we list the house now, before winter, we could have everything settled by the holidays," she continued. "Clean break, fresh start for both of us. You could put your share towards something in a neighborhood with actual growth potential." I listened to her entire presentation without interrupting, impressed despite myself by the amount of work she'd put into her research. Victoria was smart and capable, and her analysis would have been compelling if it had been based on complete information. "You've done a lot of work on this," I said when she finished. "I care about your future, Elena. I know you think I'm just being mercenary, but I genuinely want you to have the best possible outcome. And staying here, in this house, in this neighborhood, is not going to give you that." I poured us both coffee and sat down across from her at the table where Abuela used to grade our homework and help us practice spelling words. The surface was scarred from decades of use, marked with ring stains from countless cups and the faint outline of letters we'd traced when we were learning to write our names. "Can I show you something?" I asked. Victoria nodded, probably expecting me to pull out my own set of financial projections, or maybe a sentimental photo album that would prove how impractical I was being. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the research I'd been conducting. Property tax assessments showing gradual increases over the past 2 years. Permits filed for major renovations in houses within a 6-block radius. Planning Commission minutes discussing the light rail project and its projected impact on residential property values. "The neighborhood is changing," I said. "You're right about that, but it's not declining, it's being discovered." I showed her the gallery that had opened on Elm Street and the coffee shop expansion and the young families who'd been moving in throughout the past year. I showed her the historical preservation designation and the tax incentives available for owners who maintained original architectural features. This house isn't just a house, Victoria. It's a piece of architectural history that's sitting in a neighborhood that's about to be transformed. The question isn't whether we should sell. The question is whether we're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's sitting right in front of us. Victoria studied my laptop screen with the same intensity she'd brought to her own presentation. She was competitive enough to respect well-researched arguments, even when they contradicted her own conclusions. How long would this transformation take? She asked. Based on similar neighborhoods in other cities, probably 3 to 5 years for significant appreciation. But the key is positioning ourselves correctly before the wave hits, not trying to catch up after property values have already jumped. We spent the next hour going through my research point by point. Victoria asked sharp questions and poked holes in my assumptions, but she couldn't argue with the underlying trends I'd identified. The neighborhood was indeed changing, and change in this direction historically led to increased property values. What about the condition of the house? She asked. Even if the neighborhood appreciates, this place still needs major work. I pulled out the renovation plan Marcus and I had developed, broken down into phases based on budget and impact. Some projects could be done immediately for relatively little money, but would dramatically improve the house's appearance and functionality. Others could wait until increased property values made them financially feasible. The goal isn't to sink money into renovations we can't afford, I explained. It's to make strategic improvements that highlight the house's best features while we wait for the neighborhood to catch up to its potential. Victoria gathered her papers and tapped them into a neat stack. This is a lot to process, she said finally. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm not ready to say you're right either. This is still a significant gamble, based on projections that might not pan out. Everything's a gamble, Victoria. The question is whether you're betting on decline or growth. After she left, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. I hadn't convinced her to embrace my vision for the house, but I'd at least introduced the possibility that my plan might be based on logic rather than sentiment. For someone like Victoria, that was significant progress. The next few months passed quietly, marked by small improvements and gradual changes. I refinished the hardwood floors in the living room, revealing a rich honey oak that had been hidden under beige carpet for decades. I updated the hardware in the kitchen, replacing brass fixtures with brushed nickel that complemented the original cabinet style. I planted bulbs in the front garden that would bloom in spring and add color visible from the street. Each project was modest individually, but collectively they began to transform the house's appearance and feel. More importantly, they helped me understand the property's potential in ways that spreadsheets and market analyses couldn't capture. This wasn't just about financial return, it was about creating something beautiful and meaningful that would endure beyond any particular market cycle. Victoria stepped by occasionally, usually when she was in the neighborhood, visiting clients or meeting friends for lunch. She never stayed long, but I noticed her paying attention to the changes I was making. She commented on the floors and asked questions about the light fixtures I'd installed in the hallway. Her tone was neutral rather than dismissive, which felt like progress. By spring, the improvements were becoming noticeable to neighbors and visitors. Mrs. Henderson complimented the garden and asked for advice about her own landscaping projects. The mail carrier mentioned that the house was looking good and asked if I was planning to sell. Even Victoria's occasional comments were more curious than critical. The real shift came in late May, when a house 3 blocks away sold for significantly more than its asking price. The buyers were a couple from the city, who'd been looking for character and charm in a neighborhood with potential for appreciation. They'd outbid 2 other offers and planned to do extensive renovations while maintaining the home's original architectural features. Marcus called me the day the sale was reported in the local real estate newsletter. "This is it," he said. "This is the beginning of what we've been talking about. That house sold for 40% more than comparable properties were going for last year." I drove past the house that afternoon and saw the new owners measuring windows and taking pictures of architectural details. They looked like people who understood the difference between price and value, who were willing to invest time and money in something that mattered to them beyond immediate convenience. That evening, Victoria called instead of texting, which usually meant she had something important to discuss. I heard about the sale on Willow Street, she said without preamble. 40% over asking price is unusual for this neighborhood. It's what happens when people recognize potential, I said. One sale doesn't establish a trend, Elena. It could be an anomaly. It could be. Or it could be the beginning of exactly what I've been telling you was coming. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing in the background. She was probably already researching the sale details and looking for comparable properties. Have you thought about getting the house appraised? She asked finally. Why would I do that? Because if property values really are starting to climb, we should have a baseline for comparison, and if they're not, we should know that too. It was a reasonable suggestion, and I agreed to contact an appraiser within the next few weeks. Victoria offered to split the cost, which surprised me. She was clearly taking the possibility of neighborhood appreciation more seriously than she had 6 months earlier. The appraiser was a woman named Janet Morrison, who'd been evaluating properties in the area for over 20 years. She spent 3 hours measuring rooms, photographing architectural features, and making notes about the house's condition and unique characteristics. She was particularly impressed by the original hardwood floors and the craftsmanship evident in the built-in bookcases and crown molding. Houses like this don't get built anymore, she said, running her hand along the oak banister that curved gracefully from the first floor to the second. The materials alone would cost a fortune today, and finding craftsmen with these skills is nearly impossible. She asked detailed questions about the renovations I'd completed and the plans I had for future improvements. When I showed her the historical preservation designation and the tax incentives available for maintaining original features, she made additional notes and asked for copies of the documentation. Properties with historical significance often appreciate differently than standard residential real estate, she explained. Buyers who are looking for character and architectural integrity are willing to pay premiums for houses that offer something unique. The appraisal process took 2 weeks, and during that time I found myself alternating between excitement and anxiety about the results. If the house was worth significantly more than Victoria expected, it would validate everything I'd been arguing about the neighborhood's potential. If it wasn't, I'd have to seriously reconsider whether my emotional attachment to the property was clouding my financial judgment. Janet called on a Thursday afternoon with the results. The house was currently valued at $260,000, which was substantially higher than the figures Victoria had been using in her calculations. More importantly, Janet's report included a projection of potential value after completion of planned renovations and assuming continued neighborhood development. Based on current trends and comparable sales in similar neighborhoods, I would estimate the property could be worth between $350,000 and $400,000 within the next 3 to 5 years, she said. That assumes the light rail project moves forward as planned and the historical preservation incentives continue to attract buyers who value architectural character. I thanked her and sat in my kitchen for a long time after hanging up, looking around at the space that Victoria had dismissed as outdated and problematic. The same kitchen that an experienced appraiser had just valued at more than Victoria thought the entire house was worth. That evening, I called Victoria and shared the appraisal results. She listened without interrupting, asked for Janet's credentials and experience, and requested a copy of the full report. "This changes things," she said finally. "Does it? Elena, if these projections are even halfway accurate, we're not talking about a modest return on investment. We're talking about significant wealth building over a relatively short period of time." I could hear the shift in her voice, the same tone she used when she'd identified a promising client or marketing opportunity. Victoria was many things, but she wasn't stupid about money. When presented with compelling financial projections, she was capable of setting aside her personal preferences. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking that maybe I owe you an apology, and maybe I should take a closer look at this neighborhood before I keep pushing you to abandon it." The conversation that followed was different from any we'd had about the house before. Instead of trying to convince me to sell, Victoria wanted to understand my renovation timeline and budget projections. Instead of criticizing the neighborhood's current condition, she asked about development plans and infrastructure improvements. By the time we hung up, she'd offered to contribute financially to some of the larger renovation projects in exchange for a more detailed partnership agreement about the property's future. It wasn't exactly the outcome I'd hoped for, but it was a significant step toward mutual respect and shared investment in our family's legacy. Summer passed with steady progress on both the house and the neighborhood. I completed the kitchen renovation, keeping the original cabinets, but updating appliances and adding a tile backsplash that complemented the home's vintage character. Victoria contributed to the bathroom renovation, and we worked together to choose fixtures that balanced historical authenticity with modern functionality. The changes were dramatic but respectful, highlighting the house's architectural strengths while improving its livability. More importantly, we'd begun functioning as partners rather than adversaries, combining my emotional investment in the property with Victoria's business acumen and financial resources. By fall, 3 more houses in the neighborhood had sold for prices that exceeded previous market expectations. The light rail project had received final approval and was scheduled to begin construction the following spring. Property tax assessments were being adjusted upward throughout the area, reflecting increased market values. Victoria was spending more time at the house, sometimes bringing clients by to show them what thoughtful renovation could accomplish in a historical property. She'd begun referring to it as our investment, rather than Elena's project, and she'd started contributing ideas rather than just criticism. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was undeniable. Both the house and our relationship had evolved in ways that neither of us had anticipated when this process began. We'd learned to value each other's perspectives and to work together toward goals that benefited both of us. As winter approached, I realized that the most important change hadn't been to the house or the neighborhood. It had been to my understanding of what family inheritance really meant. Abuela hadn't just left us a house, she'd left us an opportunity to learn how to be sisters who supported each other rather than competed with each other. The final validation came in early December, when a house 2 blocks away sold for $375,000, after a bidding war between 4 different buyers. It was slightly smaller than ours, and lacked many of the architectural features that made our property unique. Victoria was the one who called with the news. "Elena," she said, "I think we need to talk." That phone call from Victoria in December changed everything between us, but not in the way I expected. Instead of the triumphant vindication I thought I wanted, I felt something closer to exhaustion. Proving I was right about the house's potential had cost me months of careful research, strategic renovations, and patient explanations to someone who should have trusted my judgment from the beginning. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had the advantage of being on familiar ground. Victoria arrived 15 minutes early, which was unusual for her, and had already claimed a corner table where we could talk without being overheard. She'd brought a leather portfolio and wore the expression of someone preparing to negotiate a business deal. The coffee shop was one of those places that tried too hard to look vintage, with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb fixtures that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Victoria fit right in, but I felt underdressed in my practical sweater and jeans. This was her world, all polished surfaces and careful presentation, and I was still learning how to navigate it. "Elena," she said when I sat down, "I need to apologize." The words hung between us like something fragile that might shatter if either of us moved too quickly. Victoria didn't apologize often or easily, and when she did, it usually came with conditions or explanations that diminished its impact. "I've been treating you like you were being sentimental instead of strategic," she continued. "I assumed that because you were emotionally attached to the house, your judgment was compromised. That was unfair, and as it turns out, wrong." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a stack of papers that looked like they'd been prepared by a professional research team. Charts showing property value trends in our neighborhood, compared to others in the city. Maps highlighting infrastructure improvements and development projects. Financial projections that extended 5 years into the future. "I've spent the past 2 weeks doing my own analysis," she said, "and the data supports everything you've been telling me. More than that, it suggests we're sitting on something that could be transformational for both of us if we handle it correctly." I sipped my coffee and studied the documents she'd prepared. Victoria's research was more comprehensive than anything I'd been able to compile on my own, with access to commercial real estate databases and market analysis tools that were beyond my budget. Her conclusions matched mine, but with a level of detail and projection that made the opportunity seem even more significant. The light rail project is the key catalyst, she explained, pointing to a timeline that showed construction phases and projected completion dates. Properties within walking distance of transit stops typically see appreciation of 15 to 25% within 2 years of service beginning. But that's just the baseline. When you combine transit access with historical preservation incentives and the existing architectural character, we're looking at potential appreciation that could exceed 50%. She pulled out another chart showing comparable neighborhoods in other cities that had experienced similar development patterns. The numbers were impressive, but they were also speculative. Real estate markets could be unpredictable, and projections based on other markets didn't guarantee similar results in our area. There's risk involved, Victoria acknowledged, reading my expression correctly. But there's also significant opportunity cost if we don't position ourselves to benefit from these trends. The question is whether we're willing to invest the time and money necessary to maximize the property's potential. This was the Victoria I remembered from our childhood, the one who could talk me into elaborate schemes that always seemed impossible until she made them work. She had a gift for seeing possibilities that other people missed, and the determination to pursue them even when the odds seemed unfavorable. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "Partnership," she said simply. "Real partnership, not just you doing the work while I contribute occasional funding. I want to be involved in the planning and decision-making. I want to understand the renovation timeline and help prioritize projects based on return on investment. I want us to approach this as a business venture that also happens to honor our family history." The idea was appealing but also concerning. Victoria and I had very different working styles and priorities. She was focused on efficiency and measurable outcomes, while I was more interested in maintaining the house's character and community connections. Finding a balance between those approaches wouldn't be easy. "How would that work practically?" I asked. Victoria pulled out a draft agreement she'd prepared, complete with timelines, budget allocations, and decision-making protocols. She'd clearly spent considerable time thinking through the logistics of our collaboration. "I'm proposing a 3-year partnership," she said. "I'll contribute $50,000 toward major renovations, you'll continue living in and maintaining the house, and we'll make decisions together about which projects to prioritize. At the end of 3 years, we'll get a new appraisal and decide whether to sell or continue the partnership." The financial commitment was substantial, more than enough to complete all the renovations Marcus and I had identified as essential. But the decision-making structure concerned me. Victoria was accustomed to being in charge, and I wasn't sure how well she'd adapt to collaborative planning. "What happens if we disagree about priorities?" I asked. "We negotiate until we find solutions that work for both of us," she said. "You have more knowledge about the house itself and the neighborhood dynamics. I have more experience with project management and financial planning. Neither of us has all the answers, but together we might be able to avoid some expensive mistakes." We spent the next 2 hours going through her proposal in detail, discussing everything from contractor selection to design principles to marketing strategy for eventual sale. Victoria had clearly been thinking about this partnership as more than just a real estate investment. She was approaching it as a comprehensive business plan that could serve as a model for future projects. By the time we left the coffee shop, we'd agreed to a modified version of her proposal. I would retain primary decision-making authority about design and renovation choices, while Victoria would take the lead on financial planning and project management. We'd meet weekly to review progress and make major decisions together. The first few weeks of our partnership were awkward as we figured out how to work together without stepping on each other's preferences. Victoria wanted to move faster than I was comfortable with, while I wanted to research every decision more thoroughly than her schedule allowed. We had disagreements about contractors, design choices, and budget priorities that sometimes felt like echoes of childhood arguments about fairness and control. But gradually, we developed a rhythm that took advantage of our different strengths. Victoria's business connections helped us find skilled contractors who specialized in historical renovations, My relationship with neighbors provided insights about permit processes and local regulations that saved us time and money. Her financial planning ensured that we stayed within budget, while my attention to architectural details ensured that renovations enhanced rather than compromised the house's character. The first major project was updating the electrical system throughout the house. The existing wiring was functional but outdated, and bringing it up to current codes would be necessary for any future sale. It was expensive, disruptive work that required opening walls and temporarily relocating to a hotel, but it was also essential infrastructure that would support all other improvements. Victoria handled the contractor negotiations and permit applications with efficiency that impressed even the city inspectors. She'd researched electrical contractors throughout the region, checked references, and negotiated a fixed-price contract that protected us from cost overruns. The work was completed on schedule and within budget, giving us both confidence in our collaborative approach. The kitchen renovation was next, and this project revealed more about our working relationship than either of us had anticipated. Victoria wanted to completely modernize the space with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and custom cabinetry that would appeal to potential buyers. I wanted to maintain the vintage character while improving functionality, keeping the original cabinet frames, but updating hardware and adding period-appropriate fixtures. We spent hours debating countertop materials, appliance finishes, and cabinet configurations. Victoria argued that buyers in our target market would expect contemporary amenities, while I insisted that the kitchen's charm lay in its authentic vintage details. Our discussions sometimes became heated, with each of us defending our vision as though the house's entire future depended on granite versus butcher block. Marcus mediated our disagreements with patience and practical advice. He'd worked on dozens of kitchen renovations and understood how to balance historical authenticity with modern functionality. His suggestions helped us find compromises that satisfied both of our priorities without compromising the project's budget or timeline. The final kitchen design retained the original cabinet frames, which were solid oak and beautifully crafted, but updated them with new doors, hardware, and interior organizers. We chose quartz countertops that looked like marble but required less maintenance, and selected appliances in a vintage-inspired finish that complemented the house's character while providing contemporary performance. The result was spectacular. The kitchen felt both timeless and current, with enough modern convenience to satisfy practical buyers while maintaining the architectural integrity that made the house special. Victoria admitted that my instincts about preserving character had been correct, while I acknowledged that her attention to buyer preferences had improved our design choices. Our success with the kitchen renovation established a pattern for future projects. Victoria would research market trends and buyer preferences, I would investigate historical details and architectural requirements, and Marcus would help us find solutions that balanced both sets of priorities. The process was sometimes slow and occasionally frustrating, but it consistently produced results that exceeded what any of us could have achieved independently. The bathroom renovation followed a similar collaborative process, with Victoria pushing for luxury features while I advocated for period-appropriate designs. We settled on a clawfoot tub that we found at an architectural salvage yard, combined with new plumbing fixtures in a vintage style and tile work that referenced the home's original design elements. Spring brought the beginning of construction on the light rail line, with surveying teams and preliminary site preparation visible throughout the neighborhood. Property values began climbing even faster than Victoria's projections had suggested, driven by speculation about transportation access and the visibility of ongoing infrastructure investment. Houses in our area that had been sitting on the market for months suddenly attracted multiple offers. Properties that needed significant work were selling at prices that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The transformation Victoria had predicted was happening ahead of schedule and with more dramatic impact than either of us had anticipated. Our house was becoming a showcase for thoughtful historical renovation. The work we'd completed had dramatically improved its appearance and functionality while maintaining the architectural character that made it unique. Real estate agents began bringing clients by to see what was possible with older properties, and several neighbors asked for recommendations about contractors and design approaches. Victoria started documenting our renovation process with professional photography, creating a portfolio that could be used for marketing when we eventually decided to sell. She'd also begun researching similar properties in comparable neighborhoods, building a database of market information that would help us time our sale for maximum return. But something unexpected was happening during this process. The more time Victoria spent at the house, the more attached she became to the project and the community we were part of. She started knowing neighbors by name and asking about their renovation projects. She volunteered to help with the neighborhood association's fundraising efforts and joined the Historical Preservation Committee. The sister who had once dismissed Maple Avenue as a declining neighborhood was becoming one of its most enthusiastic advocates. She attended city council meetings to support zoning changes that would protect the area's architectural character. She contributed to a grant application for streetscape improvements that would enhance the neighborhood's walkability and visual appeal. Our weekly partnership meetings evolved from business discussions into something more like family planning sessions. We talked about the house's future, but also about our own futures and how they might be connected to this place and this community. Victoria began referring to it as our neighborhood rather than Elena's neighborhood, and she started making design decisions based on long-term livability rather than just resale value. By summer, the house was approaching completion of its major renovations. The hardwood floors gleamed throughout the first floor, restored to their original honey oak finish. The kitchen and bathroom were both functional and beautiful, combining modern convenience with vintage charm. The electrical and plumbing systems were completely updated, and the exterior had been painted in historically accurate colors that highlighted the architectural details. Victoria suggested that we host a neighborhood party to celebrate the renovation and show appreciation for the community that had supported our efforts. It was an idea that would have been unthinkable when this process began, but it felt natural given how much our relationship with the neighborhood had evolved. The party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in early August, with plans for a potluck dinner on the front lawn and tours of the renovated house for anyone who was interested. Victoria handled the logistics with her typical efficiency, while I focused on preparing the house and coordinating with neighbors about food and setup. Mrs. Henderson contributed her famous potato salad and helped arrange borrowed tables and chairs. The Peterson family provided a sound system and volunteered to manage parking logistics. The Morales family, whose house sale had been one of the early indicators of neighborhood change, returned for the party and brought friends who were considering moving to the area. The evening was everything we'd hoped it would be. More than 60 people attended, including neighbors we'd known for years, and new residents who were just becoming part of the community. Children played on the front lawn while adults toured the house and shared stories about their own renovation projects and neighborhood experiences. Victoria was in her element, explaining renovation choices and discussing property values with prospective buyers while also learning about neighborhood history from longtime residents. She'd found a way to combine her business instincts with genuine community engagement, and the result was more authentic than I'd thought possible. Near the end of the evening, as we were cleaning up and saying goodbye to the last guests, Victoria pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Elena," she said, "I need to tell you something. I don't want to sell the house." The statement caught me completely off guard. After months of planning for eventual sale and calculating return on investment, Victoria was suddenly changing the fundamental premise of our partnership. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I want to keep it. I want us to keep it. This house, this neighborhood, this community we've become part of. I don't want to treat it as just a financial investment anymore." She looked around the front yard, where fairy lights were still strung between the oak trees and folding tables were stacked near the porch. The scene looked like something from a magazine spread about perfect summer evenings, but it was also real and genuine in ways that couldn't be staged. "I know this sounds crazy given everything I said about building wealth and maximizing return on investment," she continued. "But I've realized that some things are worth more than their market value. This place has become important to me in ways I didn't expect." I understood what she meant, because I'd been feeling something similar. The house had always been emotionally significant to me because of its connection to our grandmother and our family history. But the renovation process had transformed it into something larger, a symbol of what was possible when people invested in community and continuity rather than just convenience and profit. "What about your condo?" I asked. "What about the lifestyle you've built in Harbor Hills?" Victoria smiled with something that looked like relief. "The condo is beautiful, but it's not home. It's just a place where I keep my stuff between business trips and client meetings. This house, this neighborhood, feels like it could actually be home. We spent the next hour talking about what keeping the house would mean practically. Victoria could sell her condo and move into the second floor of the house, giving us both privacy while sharing the expenses and responsibilities of maintaining the property. We could continue making improvements based on livability rather than resale value, creating a space that truly suited our needs and preferences. The financial implications were significant but manageable. The house's increased value meant that we could refinance at favorable terms, and Victoria's sale of her condo would provide capital for ongoing improvements and financial security. More importantly, keeping the house would allow us to benefit from continued neighborhood appreciation without the transaction costs and capital gains taxes that would come with selling. But the decision was about more than just money. It was about choosing community over mobility, continuity over convenience, long-term investment over short-term profit. It was about recognizing that some things become more valuable the longer you hold on to them, not because of market forces but because of the relationships and experiences they make possible. Victoria moved into the house in September, bringing her efficient organizational systems and her collection of art that actually looked perfect on our freshly painted walls. We established routines for sharing space and responsibilities that respected both of our needs for privacy and independence, while taking advantage of the benefits of partnership. The transition wasn't always smooth. Victoria was used to controlling her environment completely, while I was used to making decisions independently. We had disagreements about household management, social commitments, and future planning that sometimes required careful negotiation. But we also discovered that we worked well together when we focused on shared goals rather than individual preferences. The neighborhood continued evolving throughout the fall, with new families moving in and longtime residents investing in improvements to their own properties. Property values climbed steadily, driven by transportation access, community investment, and word-of-mouth recommendations from people who discovered what made the area special. Our house became something of a neighborhood landmark, an example of what was possible when renovation honored historical character while embracing modern functionality. Real estate agents brought clients by regularly, and several neighbors credited our project with inspiring their own renovation efforts. Victoria started working from home more often, converting one of the upstairs bedrooms into an office that allowed her to manage her marketing consulting business while staying connected to the community we'd become part of. She began taking on clients in the real estate and construction industries, applying her professional skills to projects that supported neighborhood development and historical preservation. I continued working at the accounting firm, but also started offering bookkeeping services to neighbors who were managing their own renovation projects. The combination of my professional skills and my knowledge of local contractors and regulations made me a valuable resource for people who were navigating the complexities of improving older properties. By winter, our partnership had evolved into something that felt both natural and sustainable. We'd learned to appreciate each other's strengths and accommodate each other's quirks. Victoria's business acumen helped us make smart financial decisions, while my community connections helped us stay grounded in the relationships that made our investment meaningful beyond its market value. The house itself had become everything we'd envisioned and more. It was beautiful and functional, historically authentic and thoroughly modern, a source of financial security and a foundation for family and community connections. But most importantly, it had become the catalyst for a transformation in our relationship that neither of us had expected when this process began. We'd started as sisters who struggled to understand each other's values and priorities. We'd become partners who could combine our different strengths to achieve goals that neither of us could have reached independently. The house had taught us how to work together, how to respect each other's perspectives, and how to build something lasting that honored both our practical needs and our emotional connections. Winter evenings found us sitting in the living room we'd restored together, planning spring garden projects and discussing neighborhood developments while snow fell outside windows that framed views of mature oak trees and houses where lights glowed warm against the cold. These were the moments that justified every hour of research, every renovation decision, every difficult conversation that had brought us to this point. The house was worth more than we'd ever imagined when Victoria first suggested selling it. But its true value couldn't be measured in market comparisons or financial projections. It was worth the relationships we'd built, the community we'd joined, the family bonds we'd strengthened, and the future we'd created together in a place that had always been home but had finally become everything home could be. The mahogany conference table reflected the afternoon light streaming through the law office windows when Victoria finally broke the silence. She'd been staring at the appraisal document for 3 full minutes, her manicured fingers gripping the edges of the paper like she was afraid it might disappear if she let go. $4.2 million, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Elena, this can't be right. Janet Morrison, the same appraiser who'd evaluated our house 2 years earlier, maintained her professional composure despite the dramatic reaction her report had generated. She'd seen plenty of surprised property owners over her career, but Victoria's expression suggested something closer to shock than mere surprise. The valuation is accurate based on current market conditions and comparable sales, Janet said calmly. The light rail completion last month has accelerated appreciation throughout your neighborhood. Combined with the historical preservation designation and the quality of renovations you've completed, your property now represents one of the most desirable addresses in the region. Victoria set the appraisal down and looked at me across the polished table. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't quite hide the pallor that had overtaken her complexion when Janet first announced the figure. Elena, do you understand what this means? She asked, her voice gaining strength as the implications began to register. When I first wanted to sell this house, I thought we might get $200,000 if we were lucky. We've been living in a house worth over $4 million. The number was staggering, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. Property values throughout our neighborhood had been climbing dramatically since the light rail began service. Houses that had sold for modest amounts just 3 years earlier were now commanding prices that seemed to belong in a different economic universe entirely. Our street had become a destination for buyers seeking architectural character and urban convenience. The mature oak trees that Victoria once dismissed as maintenance problems were now featured in real estate marketing as irreplaceable amenities. The vintage details she'd wanted to modernize were highlighted as unique selling points that justified premium pricing. The renovation work you completed has been exceptional, Janet continued, flipping through photographs that documented our transformation of the property. You maintained all the historical integrity while updating systems and functionality. Properties that achieve this balance are extremely rare in today's market. Victoria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through real estate listings, her business instincts taking over despite her obvious amazement at our property's valuation. Within minutes, she'd pulled up comparable sales that confirmed Janet's assessment. Houses in our neighborhood with similar square footage but less architectural character were selling for prices that approached our appraised value. Look at this, she said, turning her phone toward me. The Morrison house on Elm Street sold last week for $3.8 million. It's smaller than ours, and they gutted all the original features during their renovation. The buyers paid almost $4 million for a house with none of the character that makes ours special. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Victoria had spent months trying to convince me that our neighborhood was declining, and that maintaining the house's original character was financially foolish. Now that same character was the primary driver of a valuation that exceeded our wildest projections. Janet gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but Victoria stopped her with additional questions about market trends and future projections. The appraiser explained that transportation access, historical preservation incentives, and neighborhood character were combining to create what economists called a perfect storm for property appreciation. Properties like yours are becoming increasingly rare, Janet said. Most buyers in this price range want architectural authenticity, but they also want modern systems and thoughtful updates. Finding houses that offer both is extremely difficult, which is why buyers are willing to pay premium prices when they find them. After Janet left, Victoria and I sat in the law office conference room, both of us struggling to process the magnitude of what we'd just learned. The house that had been the source of so much conflict between us had quietly become one of the most valuable residential properties in the region. Elena, Victoria said finally, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an acknowledgement that you were right about everything. The neighborhood potential, the value of maintaining historical character, the importance of community investment. You saw all of this when I was too focused on quick returns to recognize real opportunity. The admission meant more to me than the property valuation itself. Victoria wasn't someone who acknowledged mistakes easily, and her recognition of my judgment felt like validation of every decision I'd made about the house and our family's legacy. You contributed just as much, I said. Your business skills and financial investment made the renovations possible. Your project management kept us on budget and on schedule. Your marketing expertise helped us understand buyer preferences. We couldn't have achieved this valuation without both of our contributions. Victoria smiled, and for the first time in months, it looked completely genuine rather than professionally practiced. So what do we do now? Do we sell and split what might be the largest windfall either of us will ever see? Do we refinance and use the equity for other investments? Do we just keep living our lives and pretend we're not sitting on a financial goldmine? The questions were practical, but they also touched on deeper issues about our relationship and our values. The house had become much more than a real estate investment for both of us. It was our home, our community anchor, and the foundation for a partnership that had transformed our understanding of what family could mean. I don't want to sell, I said. Not because I'm sentimental about the house, though I am, but because I can't imagine finding anything better than what we've built here. The community connections, the satisfaction of maintaining something beautiful and historically significant, the partnership we've developed. These things have value that can't be measured in dollars. Victoria nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. The condo I used to live in cost me $4,000 a month and never felt like home. Living here costs us a fraction of that, and every day I wake up grateful to be part of this neighborhood and this community. We decided to keep the house, but to explore ways to leverage its value for other opportunities. Victoria suggested that we could use our equity to invest in additional properties in the neighborhood, applying the renovation expertise we'd developed to other houses that had similar potential. We could become the go-to team for historical renovations in this area, she said, her entrepreneurial instincts recognizing a business opportunity. There are at least a dozen houses within walking distance that could benefit from the same approach we used here. We could build a portfolio of properties while also contributing to neighborhood preservation and development. The idea was appealing, but it also represented a significant commitment to staying in the community and expanding our partnership. We'd learned to work well together on one house, but managing multiple properties and renovation projects would require a different level of organization and collaboration. Over the following weeks, we researched the feasibility of Victoria's proposal. There were indeed several houses in the neighborhood that were undervalued relative to their potential, and their owners were interested in selling to buyers who would maintain architectural character while updating functionality. Marcus was enthusiastic about the possibility of expanding our renovation work. He'd enjoyed the challenges of our project and had developed expertise in historical preservation techniques that were becoming increasingly valuable in the marketplace. His willingness to partner with us on additional projects gave us confidence that we could maintain the quality standards that had made our first renovation successful. Victoria drafted a business plan that outlined how we could finance and manage a small portfolio of renovation projects. Her financial modeling showed that we could leverage our current property's value to acquire and improve additional houses, building wealth while contributing to neighborhood preservation. But the most important conversation happened on a Saturday morning in our kitchen, over coffee and the newspaper that still got delivered to our front porch every day. Victoria had been unusually quiet, and I could tell she was working through something that went beyond business planning. "Elena," she said finally, "I need to tell you something. When I first started pushing you to sell this house, it wasn't really about the money, it was about control. I was scared that you were making decisions I didn't understand, and instead of trusting your judgment, I tried to impose my own priorities." She paused, looking out the window at the garden we'd planted together the previous spring. I'd spent so many years building a life where I controlled every variable, where everything was predictable and efficient and safe. The idea that you might be right about something I couldn't quantify terrified me more than the possibility of financial loss. The honesty was characteristic of the person Victoria had become over the past 2 years. The renovation process had changed both of us, but her transformation had been more dramatic. She'd learned to value community over convenience, character over efficiency, long-term investment over short-term control. "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Living here," she said simply, "being part of this neighborhood, working with you on projects that mattered, seeing how much more satisfying it is to build something lasting than to just accumulate assets. I realized that the life I'd been trying to convince you to want was actually pretty empty." Victoria's recognition of her own growth was touching, but it also highlighted how much our relationship had evolved. We'd started as sisters who struggled to understand each other's values and had become partners who could combine our different strengths to achieve shared goals. The newspaper that morning featured an article about rising property values in historically preserved neighborhoods throughout the region. Our area was specifically mentioned as an example of successful community development that balanced preservation with progress. The article included quotes from city planners who credited private investment and community engagement with creating a model for sustainable neighborhood improvement. "We're famous," Victoria said, pointing to a paragraph that described our street as a showcase for thoughtful renovation that honors architectural heritage while embracing contemporary functionality. The recognition felt good, but it also reminded us that our success had been built on more than just financial investment. The community relationships we'd developed, the preservation standards we'd maintained, and the collaborative approach we'd taken had all contributed to outcomes that benefited everyone in the neighborhood. As winter turned to spring, we began seriously exploring the possibility of expanding our renovation work to additional properties. 2 houses on our street had come on the market, and their owners were specifically seeking buyers who would maintain architectural character while updating systems and functionality. Victoria had developed relationships with historic preservation consultants, specialty contractors, and design professionals who understood the complexities of working with older properties. Her business network had become a valuable resource for managing renovation projects efficiently while maintaining quality standards. The appraisal that had revealed our property's $4.2 million value had been shocking, but it had also confirmed that our approach to renovation and community investment was financially sound as well as personally satisfying. We'd proven that preservation and profit could work together, that family partnerships could be both emotionally and economically rewarding. Most importantly, we'd learned that some investments appreciate in ways that can't be measured in market valuations. The relationship Victoria and I had built, the community connections we'd developed, and the satisfaction of maintaining something beautiful and historically significant had value that would endure regardless of future market fluctuations. The house that had once been a source of conflict between us had become the foundation for a life and a partnership that neither of us could have imagined when this journey began. Victoria had stopped calling it embarrassing and started calling it home, and that transformation, more than any financial return, represented the true measure of our success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.